So I'll just do a really shitty intro and then we'll get going.
Look at that.
It's so great to welcome my friend, constant collaborator and communication master, Jenna Dominique, to the show. Jenna, you've been like all over the world for the last few months. Where are you now and how are things going?
Yeah, so awesome to be here, Spencer. I have been all over the world. I can firmly say I'm back in the UK, so I'm on familiar territory and here for the foreseeable future this year. So yeah, it's nice to be back on familiar ground.
Amazing. Yeah, you were like in Canada for a while and then over in Scandinavia, I think. I haven't been stalking you totally on LinkedIn, but a little bit.
I've been blasting it all over LinkedIn, right, and on my socials. So it has been some awesome trips this year, I must say. Yeah, I do. I love a bit of traveling, but it's been good to get out and about and work elsewhere as well.
Amazing. Hey, look, I have done a bit of LinkedIn stalking, if truth be told, and every time I speak to people like this on a show, I want to check out what their LinkedIn's saying. Even though I know you and have known you for a while, I thought I'd do the same anyway. So I've had a little peek this morning, and it says this, right? It says, I'm a pitch coach, event MC and speaker who has a tad of an obsession with communication and colourful blazers. I mean, exactly, perfectly demonstrated today. In fact, we were just talking about this before pressing record. I literally went into my wardrobe to go like, I've got to compete a little bit with Jenna because I know she's going to bring the colour. All I had was grey, black and blue. It's so disappointing.
We complement each other. It's fine. So, it's too much colour, might be a bit too much going on the screen. So
exactly. I've got the lights as a compensation, but that's about all I can do.
True.
But then this is the bit that I really want to ask a question about. It said, it started when I was 10 years old, but that's a story for another time. Can we hear that story now?
Story now, yeah. So I always think about it. Is anyone going to ask me that when they read that? Because then I really test if they've actually read my LinkedIn profile. Yeah. So when I was 10 years old, I was in primary school. I was in year 6 in UK ground. That's 10 years old. You're in sort of like the last year of your primary school, and our school had a talent show. So every year for year 6, before we went on to secondary school, we were asked that, what's your talent? And we're going to do this assembly in front of parents and friends, and you need to show off your talent. And I remember, and I'll keep the story as short as possible, but I remember going home and saying to my parents, I don't really know what my talent is. I don't, I dance a little bit, I can't sing. There wasn't anything that was standing out to me. So every Saturday we used to watch Blind Date with Cilla Black, and that was just a family tradition when I was a kid watching this Blind Date show, which actually saying it now seems a little bit strange, but I'm hoping there's a lot of people around my age that can relate to that.
Anyone not from the UK, by the way, will be like, what on earth is going on with this story? Where are we going?
Yeah, I mean, you'll look it up. Cilla Black is like an icon. I know, she's not with us now, but she was just one of my early icons. And I think when I saw her on that show presenting, we was watching Blind Date at the time, and I think my dad or my mum, I can't remember which one it was, made a throwaway comment of, you could do something like that, like couldn't you do like a show or a game show or something on the stage? So then I took the idea to my teacher, who loved the idea, and because we could involve so many other students from the school, and that was it. So I hosted my own primary school version of Blind Date. I managed to convince some of my school friends at the time to actually be on this show. My mum lent me her blazer and heels and a nice bright pink top. I remember it now. I didn't attempt the Liverpudlian accent, but I stood out on stage and I hosted my own version of Blind Date. And I think that was the first time I remember being on a stage, speaking in front of a huge assembly full of people and loving it, and just didn't really... I don't remember feeling the nerves then. I remember just really enjoying the moment and just, being this presenter on stage. And that's where I believe my passion for all things speaking started. And now any opportunity to get on stage and put a microphone in my hand, I would take that opportunity. Hence why I jumped to this opportunity to come on your podcast, Spencer.
I love that. And as you were talking there, I was thinking, like, for 99% of that room and the rest of the population, that would be like the worst possible thing anyone could be made to do or could want to do. Like it just sounds so terrifying, not just like in front of a whole group of people on stage, people that you knew as well, like your peers, your friends. It's almost given me slight nervousness in thinking about that moment, right? But I guess for some people that just becomes something that you fall into and you love, and for some people it's always a challenge. And I guess moving kind of on, like I had planned that transition, this is what you do, right? You help people now, or one of the things that you do at least is that you help people to kind of be better at communicating, be better at talking, be better at specifically at pitching. So I mean, let's dig into that. Like what kind of things do you do? Who do you help? And what are some of the challenges that they're trying to overcome?
It's a great question, because there's so many facets to what I do, and I think that's come from a realization quite early on in my career that not everyone shared this passion for public speaking and communicating in front of others. And I've worked to kind of pinpoint where that confidence came from, and I've worked to kind of pinpoint where the passion came from. And I don't remember having those nerves early on. And don't get me wrong, I get nervous going on stage, and I get nervous when I'm building up to a talk.
Okay,
but that's
good.
a good thing.
That makes me feel better.
I am human. And I think if you don't get nervous, then there's something that's not quite meaningful enough to what you're doing. Nerves, and I talk to my clients and I talk to teams when I work with them about this, that nerves can be channeled in a really positive way. And if you are feeling nervous, it means you care about what you're doing. So really try to channel that in a positive energy. And really where my career has taken me is working with mainly entrepreneurs, which I love. Love the space in terms of these ambitious people with incredible ideas who sometimes struggle to articulate actually the potential of what their idea is and what they're doing. And for me, being able to work with them, whether that's accelerator programs, whether that's individually, founders who have now built a bigger startup and are now going into that CEO role and the face of the business. That's a big part of what I do, as well as going into corporate companies, working with sales teams, working with teams that pitch the business and really try to articulate their message so they're taking their audience on this journey so that it lands and it makes sense. And I've seen the power of when you get it right, it just all falls into place. When you get it wrong, it's so obvious and it's so tough because you've got this great thing and you just haven't been able to articulate it in that powerful way that does it justice. So that's a big part of what I do. The pitch coaching is, that's really where I've, I guess, honed in on that communication piece, because I think that's such a crucial moment when you're pitching your business, your idea, your project, your product, your service. That's really where I bring the value, I guess.
Got it. And it's not just about that moment on stage or when you're actually kind of delivering. It's not just about the way that you articulate, but I think you work a lot kind of further, before that as well, talking about like the structure and how you want to really kind of craft your message in order to make it land as well and make sense of it as well, I guess. Like super important things. And I've got a bunch of questions around that, like what makes a good pitch and whatever else, but perhaps we'll come back to those in a minute. One of the things I wanted to ask about was, because I've heard you talk, well, I think you did a talk recently from memory about like the fact that everybody pitches, everyone has to do something in order to gain something, like say something in order to gain something. Like, what do you really kind of mean by that? And how can people look at their interactions possibly with a different lens, if you like? I'm super interested in that.
Yeah. And I talk about pitching almost in a similar context to sales. I think sometimes people, when I say to someone, well, you're a salesperson, we often say, no, I'm not in sales. I'm not a sales rep or a sales executive. I haven't got sales in my title. But we're all salespeople from the moment we start our careers, maybe even before that, depends on what you do and how you want to present yourself in front of others. But there's an element that we are representing ourselves, our own brand. So when we go for interviews, we are selling ourselves, we're pitching ourselves. When we try to get our ideas across, whether that's in a business or in an organization where we want to do something different or make a difference, we're selling something, we're pitching ourselves. In a personal context, we're trying to, and a really great friend of mine always uses the analogy and I used this in a talk recently, that if you're a parent or a partner, you're a brilliant salesperson right from the get-go, because you're trying to convince someone to do something that they maybe don't want to do, even though it's in their best interest. So if you
I'm not sure about brilliant, by the way, all the time. I definitely fail quite a lot with that one.
Well, there's an attempt there as well, where you're doing it, you're practicing it all the time. So this skill isn't just for the professional sense, it's in the personal sense. So, and that's what I mean in terms of always shifting our mindset around this word pitch or this word sales. Sometimes that can feel quite heavy, it can feel quite daunting, or we might not relate to it. But if you put it in a context of, you know, going for another job, going for a promotion, actually trying to get investment, maybe trying to bring someone on board with your idea, trying to get a team member to come on board with something, there's so many elements of our lives that we are selling something, we are pitching something, that this skill that I'm trying to hone in and really develop in other people, it's a life skill. It's not just for entrepreneurs and salespeople, as much as those are a really key part of who I work with. Everyone can benefit from this skill. You know, it's tough. And I spoke to someone else about this recently. It came up of, you know, the loudest person in the room is sometimes and often the one that tends to get their ideas heard. And how often do we sit around a table and someone says an idea and someone else says it in a different way and it lands and everyone's like, oh my God, that's an amazing idea. And you've got this person opposite that was like, did I not just say that 10 minutes ago? But they did. They just didn't say it in a way that was compelling enough to get that reaction. So that's really trying to get, for me, if I can get people to, you know, stand up, shout out and be heard because of these little techniques that they learn, then absolutely brilliant. I've done my job.
Oh, that's awesome. And brings to mind a couple of things, actually, to build on that. The first thing is, like, I think it's been fairly recently that I've realized that there's so much power in confidence and backing your idea when you're kind of talking about something. So I used to think of it as like just this magic power that politicians had, that they could just deliver something with just like confidence about this being the right thing. And then everyone kind of goes, oh yeah, it must be the right thing because they're delivering it so well. But actually, I think that comes into so many other parts of every person's life as well. You know, if you say something really convincingly, then it's much more likely that it's going to land well. And I was just talking about this with Nick, our friend, today, about the quality of video. Like, if you make your video really high quality, then it's much more likely that that people are going to think of you as a legitimate source and a credible source because of the quality of the work that you're kind of creating. I think that's the same in the confidence that you can deliver something as well, not just for dodgy politicians, but for anyone to be able to do that in a sort of a really confident way. And the second part, and maybe we'll come back to that question if there is a question there, but the second part of it is that, you know, I run a lot of workshops these days, and a lot of what we do is try to pull those ideas from people that wouldn't normally have that voice inside a room. And we use, I guess, Post-its and like together alone time, we call it. So rather than getting the loudest person in the room to always be the person that talks, and only allowing that kind of, what is it, the 80-20 rule? Like most contributions come from 80% of the room, and 20% of the room, and the other 80% don't kind of jump in. Like what other ways can we get to kind of redress that balance, I guess? Don't know if there's a question, but probably there is.
Yeah, there's sort of two parts to that as well. And I think what came up when you were talking about that confidence piece at the start, and it is true, you can have the best idea in the world, you have the best content in the world. The analogy I always use is the restaurant analogy. I used to work in events, hospitality events, and shadowed the chefs. And I always remember being fascinated by just how much effort went into how this plate of food looked, not just the ingredients. I need to get the ingredients right, but it was how it was presented to make someone want to actually dive in and think, oh my goodness, I want to experience these ingredients. If you get something that's, you know, not really shouting out to you, then you might actually miss out on all these amazing ingredients. And I use that analogy for your pitches or your presentations or your points that you make, is that you could have the best point in the world, but if you're not displaying it or conveying it in a way that's going to get people to sit up and listen, then it's going to go in one ear and out the other. And confidence does really come into it. And I think that you need to have confidence in your idea, but there's this inner confidence of you being able to say, right, I'm going to stand up and give my idea. I'm going to shout out. I'm going to get involved in this workshop, in this presentation. And to an extent, you're kind of taking away that fear of what other people think of it, like, and the judgment. And I think if you're confident enough and you're brave enough and you've got that courage to be able to put your ideas out there, and you can find a way that works for you to almost take that fear of judgment away, that's where the magic happens, and that's where you can really be authentic and come forward. And I think to your second point, how do you tip the balance and make sure that, you know, everyone's ideas are heard and it's not just the 20% or whatever it is in the room. It's that trying to create that space and that atmosphere, one, for the facilitator of that workshop to be able to get everyone's ideas heard, but almost have that level playing field and making sure that everyone's on that same level. And we know that everyone's ideas are great, but some might land better than others, some might work better than others, but we're here to kind of make sure everyone comes together. So that confidence piece is key, and that's a big part of what I work with others on. And I trained as a coach about sort of 4 years ago, and it was probably one of the best courses I ever did, because you really can tap into what's going to help people internally feel confident, not just put on a brave face and look confident. You need to feel it inside as well. So it's a really roundabout way of trying to answer your question, Spencer, and those two parts of what you brought forward.
But that's just like shone a light bulb in my head, like this idea that you just had there of figuring out for yourself how to get over that barrier of whatever's holding you back, of like fear, anxiety, imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough, those kind of things about that hold people back when they're pitching or when they're sharing ideas, happen all the time. And I relate it to like one of the reasons that I started doing video, and I was holding myself back. I knew technically how to do things. I knew that I had some interesting things I wanted to say. But what was holding me back was this belief that, or like this fear of, what if I do a shit job? What if the video's no good? What if no one watches? And then the trigger kind of went for me, which was like, no one's watching, so you can say what you want, right? And when you're early trying things, like content or pitching or whatever it is, when you're in that early stage, trying it when you don't have an audience, for example, is just a joy, because you can fail, you can mess up, you can get things wrong, but no one's watching you yet. And then you can master your craft over a long period of time through consistency and whatever else. And when I started doing these interviews, it was like, I know I can ask people decent questions. I do it when I'm interviewing with prototypes and whatever else, but I've never done this. And the only way that I'm going to be able to interview people in this kind of format and get really good at it is by doing it 100 times. And that's led me on to another question, which is, that I'm a huge fan of prototyping, of testing ideas, of early stage kind of exploration with things. What advice would you give to people? Like, is there a way that you can kind of prototype this mindset of or this, not just the skills, but also maybe the confidence or whatever within yourself to kind of build that up? Is there a way that you can get started if you've got some fear or anxiety, I guess?
Yeah, another awesome question, and I think it depends on. And a lot of what I say is that it depends on the person, which it is, and that's why it's about finding what works for you. But the thing I always encourage everyone to do that I work with is just record yourself before you go into that moment. Whether you are recording a video, whether you are stepping into an actual boardroom to pitch, whether you're jumping on a Zoom call and being ready to present to a meeting or whatever it might be. And however small it is, because the range of people I work with is huge in terms of their confidence levels, being able to speak up in a meeting with their team can be really, really quite tough and frustrating and challenging. But if you can record what you want to say in that meeting and listen to it back, so it's not the first time you're actually going in and talking about it, then you're almost subconsciously reminding yourself that this isn't new. I'm not just going at this for the first time. I've done this before, I've recorded it, I know it comes across well, and now I can go out and do it for real. And I think there is a balance of perfection sometimes, and as a recovering perfectionist who still absolutely needs to kind of check in with myself sometimes and think, no, it's 70% good enough, let's go out and do it. I think that's a big thing, that we kind of think we have to be perfect and it has to be this polished pitch and we have to know everything we want to say and it has to go really well. And the reality is it doesn't. No one knows for you when you're stepping out into an audience, however big or small, it might be one person, might be a room full of people. The audience don't know what you're meant to say. They've got an idea and maybe an expectation of what you might talk about, depending on what the situation is and what the stage is. But they don't know that you're meant to say these words, or they don't know that you're meant to mention this thing. So if you forget something, no one knows other than you. And it's how you then present that. Although I say that, and you were speaking about sort of prototyping videos and getting things wrong. I've got some of my Whiteboard Wednesday videos up on YouTube, and I just kept the camera rolling. I dropped pens. I forgot what I wanted to say at sometimes. I wrote something that didn't quite look right. And I thought, you know what, this is almost showing the authenticity of me being on camera and being like, oh, no, that went wrong. No, forgotten what I wanted to say then. Let's move on and come back to that. And just kept the camera rolling. So there's that almost confidence of things are going to go wrong. And it just means that you're being authentic to do that. So there are a few things in terms of prototyping. The recording definitely is my biggest tip. Record yourself, even if it's just a voice note, listen to yourself back, get comfortable with your voice and what you're saying. And then the other part is that mindset of no one really knows exactly what you're meant to say. So, you can come out on stage and do whatever it is you need to do. And if it doesn't quite go to plan, that's okay, because no one really knows what the plan is other than yourself. So just using that to your advantage and try not to take it too seriously. That can be tough, especially when I'm talking to founders who are pitching for lots of money for investment. It is a serious moment, but there is, I think, a balance of not trying to overthink things and be too serious about it, because then that might take your personality away and that connection that you're going to have with your audience as well. There's quite a lot of jam packed in there, but hopefully that touches on what you were getting at.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, way beyond. I love that. And by the way, your YouTube videos, your Whiteboard Wednesdays are absolutely golden. And I just had a look on your YouTube. Like, everyone watching this needs to go over there and just see these 2-3 minute videos with just kind of one tip about how to present a little bit better. And I think they are so good. I've learned so much. And, my ask to you, Jenna, is just keep going, because they're so good. They're so valuable. And, I'm sure audiences are going to come and keep on going. But like that story of this, I guess a couple of things there would record yourself as you're doing, but just keep on going, keep on practicing, keep on pushing forward. I think is so good. But your YouTube, we'll put a link to your YouTube.
Very kind of you. And you'll see, do you know what, when you look at the old ones, you'll see when you talk about sort of the video, and you spoke to Himo about, the quality of it. I mean, you'll see when it's old ones, I had no microphone, I didn't have my lights. It was just go for it. And I think it's an example of just start shit and it's only going to get better from there. So no, it's really kind of you to say that. And I enjoy doing them. I've got a list of more videos that I want to get done, and trying to keep it short and sweet. But there's definitely practice what I'm preaching. You're only going to get better at anything. So the more you practice, the better you're going to be. And I think sometimes we think these overnight success, I'm going to do this course and then it's all going to fall into place and I'm just going to be this brilliant speaker. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to hone my craft and still trying to get better. And everyone, it is a journey that you go on. So you're going to, you got to start somewhere. Not starting is, the biggest sort of failure that you can do. Whereas if you start, then the only way is up, right? That's a massive thing that I think as well.
Absolutely right. And we've talked quite a bit about the confidence side of things, and how you can start to there's tips to kind of get started and to build up that confidence, because if you haven't got it now, it doesn't mean you're never going to have it. It's just a matter of building up. It's like, I think of this as in a similar way as kind of creativity and a lot of other things. It's about building that muscle memory. By constantly coming up with ideas, you just get better at being creative on the moment. And I think it's the same thing with your confidence. If you start to practice, then you can build that up. But I know that I think you have like some kind of, is it a 3 C's thing that you do with clients often, confidence being one of them. Do you want to talk about the other 2 C's?
Yeah. I've got loads of C's. I think I've got a video that says it's the letter that keeps on giving in the alphabet. It's like the letter C. I just tend to apply to so much of what I do. So I might actually get these 3 that you've got in your head wrong, because I talk about so many different ones. But the ones that always come up for me are the confidence is the big one, the clarity of what you say, because no matter how good you are at speaking, if you're not clear on what your point is, you might get someone say, that was amazing. But then you get a question of like, what did they talk about? I don't actually know. So you really want to make sure you've got the confidence to get people to speak, to listen to you, sorry, but you've got that clarity of what it is you're saying. And it's crystal clear what your business does, for example. It's crystal clear what you want to get from this sale, or it's crystal clear what you want to put across in this interview, whatever it might be, like the situation you're in. So confidence and clarity. And then the third one, and the one that I'll choose for this, because there are others as well, is that compelling piece. So, to really be heard, I think it's one thing to be confident to stand up on that stage in the first place, whether that's an interview room, whether it's one person, many people, is then another thing to be really clear with what you say. But then the compelling piece is then how you then come across and how you really try to build this connection, with your audience. So if you can use your body language, your tone of voice, your space, the rapport with that audience in a way that's really going to connect with them, that's where, again, I use this sort of term, where the magic happens. This all comes into play. So confidence, clarity, compelling. There's a lot of other C's. I'm sure I've got a video on many more as well, but those are the main ones I talk about a lot because it applies to every situation that you might be pitching or communicating in as well.
That's so good. And I love the clarity piece, because I think so often we lose the headline, or we lose the one thing that we want people to take away from a talk kind of disappears because of all of the complexity around it. One of the things, again, that I'm doing a lot with my content is kind of going these big nebulous, complex ideas that I want to try to distill down to something really simple. I find that so hard. It's such a difficult thing, because especially when you're immersed into this world, if you're a founder and you've been working on something, it's been your baby, you brought it to life in some way, all of your waking and probably sleeping hours are thinking about this thing. Getting down and distilling that down into something really simple that goes through that level of clarity and gets to that level of clarity that you need to is really, really, really hard. It makes me think actually of your analogy of the dinner plate, by the way, of the restaurant. I've got this picture in my head now, because you've painted that really well, of like the best plates of food are the ones where there is real definition between each ingredient, and you can see it come into life. The different colors are kind of coming through, the shapes, the textures are all there visually, and you can get that clarity of exactly, you can almost taste it without it being in your mouth already, and I think it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? You need to be able to go to deliver something and everyone gets what it was that you wanted to get across. But how do you do that? What advice have you got from me, who's constantly trying to do that and always struggling? How do you boil that down? That's maybe a tough question, but
that's a golden question. That's a golden question. How long have we got on this session as well? And there's different things that you can do, and I love that analogy really lands. I think it every time I say to people, it's like I totally get it. I totally understand what you mean. And then obviously doing it in practice kind of is a whole different ball game, but it can be so hard. And I think there's always an element of give yourself credit that it is a challenge to be able to get something that's in your head that you've been working on for a hell of a long time, to then try to almost step back and see it from someone else's view that isn't in your head and that doesn't know everything else that's going on. And that's what I really encourage people to do. And I guess one of the tips I always say is talk to someone else that's not in your industry or doesn't know anything about what it is that you're doing, and explain it to them. And if they don't get it, and the end activity you do is get them to explain it back to you. And if what you hear isn't quite landed, he doesn't really sum it up enough, that's not on them, that's on you. So then you have to go back to the drawing board and think, right, I need to come at this with a different angle. So that's one way of doing it, because sometimes we feel like we're on our own in this. And I know working sort of solo, sometimes you think, oh my goodness, I've got no one else to speak to. But actually, when you think about it, you've got a whole network of people. So sometimes it's just a phone call to someone to say, I just want to run this thing by you. You've got 5 minutes of your time. If I explain this to you, can you then just reply back or explain it to me what you heard? And that's such a good, quick way of getting an idea of, is someone getting this that's not from that industry? So that's one of the things that I do just to start to really simplify that message. And then the other thing I talk about in one of my videos somewhere, I think it's like how to structure a talk, is think about your one key message. So if it's a product you're trying to put across, if it's an idea you're trying to put across, if you can think about your one key message, which can be tough because there might be so many different facets of this idea, but really distill it down. What's one thing that I want someone to take away from this? Or what's the one message I want someone to know about this idea? And then you start to branch it out. And the rule of 3 is really nice. How do you then break it down into 3 parts? And then in each of those 3 bits, how are you going to present each of those points? And it's a really great structure for a presentation when you're just thinking, I have no idea where to start. Start big, and then you can start narrowing it down, because we sometimes get into the detail too quickly. And that can really be where we go around in circles and we're trying to talk about something and it's just not quite landing. If you can almost think of it as a funnel and you're funneling it down, one big message, break it down. What are the 3 key points? And then how are you going to present each of those points? That can really help. So without giving you all the tips and techniques that I can possibly work with you on, those are the 2 things I'd think about. Use other people, get them to repeat back what you've explained, and really try to work on that until someone gets it in a sentence. And then think about, if you are working on your own with sort of the structure of how you're presenting something, then there's quite a cool video to take you through that as well.
That's awesome. Again, honestly, I'm learning so much myself. This is like incredibly helpful. I'm sure going to be hugely helpful for so many other people as well. One of the things that you made me think of here as well is something I do in videos, and I wonder whether this translates well to kind of live pitches as well, is with that one thing, there's kind of one takeaway that you want to leave people with, one thing that they remember. Sometimes in a video, I'll kind of say, in this video, you're going to learn this thing. And then I'll go off and I'll go quite broad, and then I'll kind of give the points like you've talked about there. And then at the end, I'll say, this is what we've gone through. This is what you need to do. So that kind of bookended, if you like, with the signposting of what I was trying to do. Is that something you'd kind of encourage people to think about doing as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Like really explicit about that message, I guess.
Yeah, and sometimes you do need to spell it out as well, because especially if you've got quite a lot of content around this one particular topic that you're speaking about. And that's why actually I found the Whiteboard Wednesday videos so difficult. I think I did a series on like 1-minute videos. I don't think any of them were 1 minute because I just couldn't fit it into 1 minute. But I was really trying to say one point in a video, but it's so easy to go off onto a tangent. But I tend to do the same thing, is that bookending. So this is what we're going to be speaking about. Then you speak about it, and then you tell them what you've spoken about. And that's kind of a rule that we hear quite a lot. But if you can just have that reminder, because we always remember the very first part of a presentation or a talk or a video, and the very last part. The middle bits can be a bit vague unless we're really making notes and paying attention. But those are the parts that we really sit up and listen to. We're engaged from the beginning, then our attention might drift a little bit. Then we notice that someone's coming to the end, and then we engage again, because we think they're going to finish and they're going to give us some groundbreaking stuff. So the bookending is really key, and it also keeps you on track. I love an analogy. I'm going to pull another one out. Maybe we can do little like snippets of like all the analogies that Jenna used on this podcast. But there's another one that I use about the plane. So the aeroplane taking off and landing. When you're doing any video presentation, pitch, whatever it might be, make sure you know exactly where you're taking off and exactly where you're landing. And by that, I mean exactly what you're going to say for that first sentence and that last sentence. And it depends, and I think people are sometimes surprised that I tend to know virtually what I'm going to say in most talks that I do. I don't script it out completely, but I've got a very good idea of the points that I'm going to make. Even I was in Sweden a couple of months ago doing a talk, and that was an hour-long workshop. So I couldn't possibly script out everything, but I knew pretty accurately what I was going to say for each point that I was making. But what I did know for word was my first sentence and my last sentence. And the reason being is that you start off strong, because sometimes we can start by saying, I'm Jenna, and I'm going to talk to you about X, Y, Z today. And that really takes away the impact of, this is what I'm going to be talking to you about. 3 key things focused on communication, pitching, and you're then into your rhythm. And then if you know exactly what you're going to land on, whether you've gone off into a tangent or not, you know where you're going to end. And that could be as simple as, that's what we went through today. These 3 things. I hope you've enjoyed it. Now open for questions. Like, that's kind of where you're going. And it just helps to kind of, with the bookending, like you said, it just helps to really keep you on track. And especially if you think, right, I've got 5 minutes for this video, or I've got an hour for this workshop, you know where you're landing. So it kind of keeps you on the runway and keeps you sort of going in the right direction. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it's so transferable as well. Like, I'm thinking of this not just from a pitching perspective, but also from a content perspective. You know, the LinkedIn article that you might write, like, what's that first line has to be nailed. Of course, you're writing the whole thing out in that instance, but that first line has to be so captivating. And then that final call to action or the final statement as well. I'm also a bit worried now because I'd planned that opening bit for this call, and I've got no idea what I'm going to close with, so I don't know where I'm landing.
We insert. This is what you said at the start.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to go back to my notes and go, so that was great. We welcomed.
Oh, so that wasn't the introduction that you did first time round. You've re-recorded that. What's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah, all these things. And I think that's really interesting. I think in the line of work that I do, I'm very conscious that I talk so much about communication and pitching and presentation skills. I'm very aware that people are like judging me on those things as I'm speaking it, because I'm trying to put it all into practice. And it's always about practicing what you preach, but there's going to be, techniques where they think, oh, Jenny, you didn't do that. No, you're right. I didn't. I went off into a tangent and I didn't bookend it. But and I think that's quite interesting that you then start to get quite self-critical about it. And that's really, for me, the mindset of I'm just going to be myself, be authentic me, put something out there. Obviously, make sure I'm trying to put these techniques into practice so people can see it, but not overthinking it, because I think it can get a little bit self-critical. Oh my goodness, I didn't do this.
Jenna, I want to get into like some specifics about kind of a structure. I think in particular, a lot of our audience, a lot of my audience, I think, are entrepreneurs, or maybe they are in a corporate, but actually need to sell in within a corporate. So kind of thinking about how they might pitch something as well. What have you got any thoughts about the structure of what a really good pitch should have, and kind of maybe the story of that as well? What are the components of a good pitch?
Definitely. And I love that you used the word story there, because that's a massive part of what I work with others on. In any context, I think story is so powerful. I think we've heard that, but sometimes we really don't kind of get just how powerful stories are when we're in a presentation. And I always use sort of the stats or the fact around people remember stories more. They remember stats and facts and numbers and things like that. And sometimes we can feel like we need to back ourselves up with all this evidence and these statistics that are going to make our points come true, when actually, when you're in a position where you're pitching, your audience trusts that you know what you're talking about. They trust that, when you give them these statistics or these facts, that they are true. But what's going to really make that connection is having a story and having a narrative that flows, and you're taking this audience on a journey with you. So it's not just bitty sections of a pitch. You're really thinking about this overall journey, this archway that you're taking people over. And I'm going to share my screen because I've got a resource that's useful that you can kind of pick and choose from it what works for you. So whether you are an entrepreneur especially, this is really useful in terms of the building blocks of your pitch, but you can adapt it in different ways as well. So let's just see if this goes ahead.
By the way, as you're doing that, it reminded me of one of the most amazing pitches I saw. I think it was the Shark Tank in America. It was actually one of the Gracie brothers who do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he told this story about when you're walking and suddenly it gets hot, suddenly it gets cold. And then he had this kind of jumper that's reversible. It's absolutely amazing. I'll put a link down to that because I think it's one of the best storytelling pitches that I've seen. It's quite remarkable. But anyway.
And it brings the emotion, if you think if your audience aren't your target market. So often I work with entrepreneurs who are pitching to investors, and that investor, more likely than not, might not be the target market for your product or service that you're pitching, but you want to get them in the shoes of someone that is, so they can really identify, I get it. I get the problem that you're solving here, and I understand that there's a need for this. And to do that, you need to kind of get them on that emotional journey and really visualizing or thinking about what that could look like. So I love that example, and there's so many great examples. Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, TED Talks. People use story all the time to bring their points to life. So keep a lookout for it. And I'll just go through this really quickly. So this is just a resource that, can be shared and downloaded as well off the back of this. But I talk about the C's. We've already talked about the 3 C's. I did say I love the letter C. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So when you are developing your pitch deck and when you're delivering your pitch, really making sure it's clear. We've spoken about being clarity, the clarity word, making sure it's compelling, engaging your audience, keeping it concise. It's probably the hardest thing. I work with a lot of teams who need to deliver 3-minute pitches or 5-minute pitches, and they think it's impossible, and it's not. You could get so much into that time. You just need to be quite ruthless and concise with what it is you're saying. And then that final piece is that credibility. And that often comes through when you're talking about yourself and your team as having the expertise to run this business and to drive this product or service forward, but also in everything you're putting together with your pitch in terms of how it looks, how you're coming across, the confidence piece as well. And then I've just scrolled down here and there's 9 building blocks, and I've been quite ruthless myself in terms of what these are. And again, this can be adapted to whatever pitch it might be, but in terms of your building blocks for your pitch, we always talk about problem and solution, really making sure you're hooking your audience and getting them to understand that there's a need for the business that you're putting together, making it crystal clear what your solution does without going into loads of detail. We want a bit of the how, but then what people are looking for, if you are pitching for investment, for example, or if it is sort of this generic and traditional entrepreneur pitch, you then want to make sure you're hitting the other points, like what is it that makes you unique? You know, knowing your market and your competitors, showing that you've got that understanding. How are you going to make money? What's your business model? What's the interest in your business so far? What traction can you prove that you've got? And then a really nice one that I've added in recently is around this piece around sustainability. People are really interested in businesses that are sustainable. So how can you show that, whether that's to your audience or whether that's to others that you're pitching to? And of course, your team, and then always having some sort of call to action at the end. And that goes for any presentation, that CTA, that call to action piece. The last thing you want to do is a video or even a LinkedIn post or a presentation, and you finish it and you think, oh, great, what's next? You know, what can I do? So is there a download? Is there something they need to sign up for? Or is there an action you want them to take? Just to make sure it stays in their mind and it kind of carries on the value that you're bringing there as well. So that's sort of a really short and sweet guide, I guess, to go through. And the one that came to mind when I'm thinking about good tools and brief tools that just might help develop a pitch if it's the first time you're doing it, or check in on an existing one that you've got as well.
Thank you so much. I didn't expect that at all. That was amazing. And did you say that's downloadable as well? So that's
downloadable. So I'll send the link and we can share that. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Amazing. Hi, look, I'm really now thinking about the call to action here, because we are just getting close to kind of getting to the point of wrapping up. But I want to say just a massive thank you. Like, I knew that this was going to be good, but I've got to say, like, you've given me so much food for thought, literally on a plate. Going to keep coming back to that metaphor. Super, super, super valuable. I think for people that are not used to pitching, that have maybe got something coming up, I hope that this is really valuable for those people. But also, you know, in everyday life, just thinking about some of those steps when you're trying to get people to act and do things differently. Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your team at work, maybe it's investors, but also maybe it's someone to buying something from you. It's that selling kind of moment as well. I think that these tips, these strategies will be helpful for so many people. I want to leave people with the ability to go and see more of what you do. So where can people kind of find you? What do you want to push people towards to go and check out, you know, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say that, thanks so much for having me on. I think that, you know, I could talk to you all day, Spencer, and talk about this topic all day long as well. I think we're, you know, we've got that history and that collaboration, like you said, that lasts for years. And I think it's just so easy to be able to have these chats and really try to bring value to the listeners as well. In terms of next steps from my side, so LinkedIn is my main social media platform. A lot of people say, you know, what about Insta and Twitter and everything else? And I always say, choose your platform and do it well. And hopefully I do. So check it out, because I always post updates and things on there. And then the YouTube channel, which we will probably link to, it's at the I Am Hub, which is the name of my business. And that's the short Whiteboard Wednesday snippets. There's some quirky things in there, communication on location. I did a winter series in Canada, it's just something a bit different and a bit fun that hopefully you get these top tips away from it as well. So LinkedIn and YouTube, I say, the places to go to find out more about what I do. But of course, anyone can get in touch and just ask me questions. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff and share some wisdom if it's going to help someone with their pitching and presentations as well.
There we go. Jenna, thanks again. Thank you so much. One thing I wanted to underline here is that these shows that I'm doing are all about making ideas work. That's what it's called. This might seem a bit different to some of the other shows that we've done. We're often talking about like testing business ideas and prototyping and that very early stage. But if you don't get your messaging right, if you don't get your communication right, if you don't get your points across to people in a way that really resonates, then all of that work is completely failed and it doesn't go anywhere. So this has been one of the most important podcasts, most important shows that I've done, I think, definitely. So again, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you in real life one day at some point again. It will happen. But for now, thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks so much, Spencer.